last week we did start this series on the family called The Functional Family. And, a while ago as I was kind of preparing for this series, I realized how challenging a series like this could be. Because while the family is something that is common to all of us and has impacted all of us to some degree, family is also a topic that is really quite diverse. And there are a lot of different ways a family will look. Things like, and I mentioned last week that I stumbled across in my research a series by Andy Stanley called Future Family that helped me a great deal and inspired a lot of what we're going to be talking about over this series. But one of the places to start is, what are some of the commonalities we have in family? I mean, what is something that we all have in common when it comes to family? And one of the things I thought of was, well, we all have a mom and a dad, right? Whether we knew them or not, it all started there, right? With a mom and a dad. And, we all have different experiences with moms and dads. And so mom and dad are not emotionally neutral words, right? Depending on your experience with your mom and or your dad, words like mom and dad can either make us feel really warm and safe and fuzzy inside, or they can make us feel cold and distant, maybe angry inside, or somewhere in between. A second thing we all have in common when it comes to families is that no one in your family is as smart as you are. I know this about you. If you're honest with yourself, if we're honest with ourselves, as we look at our families and we see the issues in our family, we have it all figured out, right? If we could just get 10 minutes to set our family down and have their full undivided attention, we could probably straighten everything out, couldn't we? I mean, can you just envision this? I mean, all right, family, just give me 10 minutes. Everybody sit down. Just listen to what I have to say. I'm going to take care of all of our problems. You need to stop being so bossy, okay? Just stop being so bossy. And you need to spend more time at home and less time at work. And you need to just get off your phone. No, really, get off your phone. Like right now, I mean, if people would just listen to us in our family, we would improve our family greatly, right? Yeah, all right. Somebody's with me. Another thing we all have in common in the context of the family is that we all have tension in our family. And I'm not talking about the kind of tension that comes from arguing or fighting, while I think we probably all have that in common as well. But the kind of tension that we talked about last week, when we started this series, a gap that needs to be minded, a tension that needs to be managed, and it's a tension between God's ideal for us and the real. And for some reason, Toby, this is not working. So God's ideal and our reality, that there is God's ideal for our family. That husbands will love their wives the way Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That wives will submit themselves to their husbands the way that the church submits herself to Christ. That marriage will be a lifelong relationship between one man and one woman. That parents will love and support their children. That children will obey their parents all of the time in everything. This is God's ideal, and it's really a beautiful picture of what could be. But then there is the real, our reality. And in many ways, our reality doesn't look anything like God's ideal. Maybe I'm a newlywed and we're just barely hanging on and we're struggling because we had no idea how difficult things were going to be in marriage. Or maybe I'm in the midst of going through a divorce, or I'm on my second, or I'm on my third marriage, or I'm going through my second divorce, or maybe you've been trying to have children to love and support, but so far all you've experienced is disappointment. Or maybe the children that you have are anything but obedient. But God holds up this shining, beautiful ideal of what family could be, and then we all live in the middle of our reality and how things really are, and this creates tension. And the question is, what do we do with that tension? Right? So, God says marriage is for a lifetime. I've been divorced. What do I do with that? God says to submit to your husband. But I'd love to submit to my husband, but I know more than he does. And I don't have a lot of respect for my husband, so it's very difficult to submit to him. What do I do with that? Or I know that God says to love my wife the way Christ loved the church, but my wife isn't the same woman I married. And it's very difficult to demonstrate love to her when I don't respect her. What do I do with that? Tension. See, the thing we're tempted to do, and we talked about this last week, is we're tempted to resolve the tension by letting go of God's ideal, forgetting about it, saying, you know what, that's too late for me, or that is antiquated, it's outdated, or it's unrealistic. Just forget about the ideal, and then call where I am in my reality normal, and resolve all of the tension. You know what? Everybody needs a practice marriage anyway, right? Let's just call it quits in this one, and move on to the second one. Or, not even God would expect me to listen to my parents. They're clueless, right? Resolve the tension. I don't need to listen to that. Or no one's really happily married, right? We just need to get through it. We just need to grin and bear it. Let go of the ideal, stay in our reality, eliminate the tension, and in the process, we lose something so vital and so beautiful. Jesus taught us to live in the tension. Not to resolve it, but to manage it. See, Jesus held up this beautifully scary, high ideal of what the family is supposed to be, but then he loved and accepted people right where they were. See, this is the beautiful thing about this tension between our reality and God's ideal, is that right in the middle of it is Jesus. He lives in that gap with us, giving us grace. Grace that forgives us when we fall short of his ideal. Love and acceptance when we fall short of his ideal. And at the same time, grace that gives us power to step out of our reality closer to the ideal that he has for us. And so we began last week with me asking you to please, 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 as we go throughout this series, avoid the temptation to resolve this tension by calling God's reality too late for you, or antiquated, or unrealistic, or outdated. But to stay in that tension with Jesus. So what are those ideals that we started with last week? Well, we started in this ancient manuscript called Colossians, and we looked at just 4 of these ideals that really aren't the most radical. If you search out the New Testament, they're kind of some of the most tame, but a summary of Colossians chapter 3, verse 18 through 21 would basically be this. Husbands, love your wives and be gentle. Wives, submit to your husbands. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, do not irritate your children. That pretty much summarizes it all, right? So for the remainder of our time today, I'd like to just tackle one of these 4. And I'd like to start with the most difficult. Which of these would you say is the most controversial, the most politically charged? Which is the one that husbands probably quote more than anything and wives hate more than anything? What? If you said, wives, submit to your husband, then you have the right answer. Wives, submit to your husbands. This is a verse that's not only found in Colossians, but it's also in an ancient manuscript that Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, Paul said it like this. He said, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Get that? Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. There is just something about this verse that makes us cringe inside, particularly the females among us, right? There's just something about it that seems somewhat outdated, somewhat antiquated. I mean, and this is a misunderstood, misapplied, misquoted verse, and it has been for a long time. I mean, you ask any husband, do you know a verse from the Bible? And while he probably can't quote John 3:16, he'll say something like, well, I think there's a verse in there about wives submitting to their husbands. And I quote it to my wife all the time. And we wonder why there's a tension between our reality and God's ideal, right? I mean, I'll sometimes have couples come into my office for counseling, and that's their first mistake. But this is very often a verse that husbands will quote. They will quote, well, it's like an ace up their sleeve that let's just get this out there and all of our problems will be resolved. Pastor, you just tell her. The Bible said, submit to your husband. And that will take care of our issues. We'll all be good. We could be out of here. But then I will typically tell husbands, yes, you're right. The Bible does say that. But it is addressed to wives, which means that wives are supposed to memorize this verse and worry about this verse. But did you also know that there are verses that are addressed to husbands? And the Bible says, oh, you didn't know that one. Oh, okay. The Bible says that we should love our wives the way Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Do you know how much Christ loved the church? He was flogged for her. He was crucified for her. He died for her. And so when you are ready to start dying for your wife, she'll probably start submitting to you. And I wonder why more couples don't come to me for counseling. But if we're honest, really honest with ourselves, this is one of the ideals that we're probably most anxious to let go of, submission. Because this is something that we look at as outdated, antiquated, politically incorrect. Many people who aren't Christ followers, and you may put yourself in that category today, you may look at Christians, and because we hold on to this ideal of wives submitting to your husbands, you would put us in the irrelevant, outdated kind of category, antiquated. And I get that. I understand that. And we Christians, we push back on this idea as well, because it seems like, is this like from the Dark Ages or what? But this principle is an application of a greater principle that comes directly from the teachings of Jesus, from the example of Jesus' life, and it's a beautiful thing in the context of marriage. And it's something that we let go of at our peril, because as we'll see, this is the foundation for a happy Christian home. And that's because it's not just about wives submitting to husbands, although that's certainly a part of it, but there is a bigger principle involved here. We took this verse from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. What verse do you suppose comes before Ephesians 5:22? Ephesians 5:21. Very good. You guys are good at math. Subtract 1. What do you suppose it says in Ephesians 5:21 about submission? Before Paul told wives to submit to their husbands, he had something else to say about submission, and it's just this. Submit to, say it with me, one another out of reverence for Christ. So before Paul ever gets to wives, he tells all Christians, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. You see, submission is a New Testament principle for all of us. It isn't only wives who are to submit. All of us are to do it. And this is so important because Jesus' greatest commandment was, one word, love, right? His greatest commandment is love. We all know that he said, love one another. Or as I have loved you, I command you to love one another in the same way I have loved you. And the problem comes is when we start trying to say, well, okay, what does that love look like? Because we tend to define love in a particular way. Our culture defines love in a particular way, that it is an emotion. It is something we feel. It's when I feel attracted to you, or I feel warm and fuzzy toward you. I'm feeling good things toward you. There's like this chemistry. That's how we kind of define love. But Jesus is not telling us, when he commands us to love one another, he's not commanding us to have warm fuzzies toward one another. Because Jesus realized we have no control over our emotions. That love is not primarily an emotion, but love is primarily a verb. It is something that we do for one another. So then the question begs to be asked, how do we love one another? Particularly, how do we love one another the way Christ loved us? And what we see from Jesus is that Jesus loved by continually putting us first, by continually serving our needs, by continually taking whatever was at his disposal and making it available to us for our use and for our service. Let me just give you a couple examples of this. This is how Jesus loved. The night before he died for us, which is a great example of his love for us, look at him on the cross. That is a great picture of what love looks like. It's not an emotion. It is an action, right? But the night before he died, in the upper room, they're having Passover. And in John chapter 13, we read this experience. It's John chapter 13, verse 3, where it says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. So how many things were under Jesus' power and authority? All things. And Jesus knew this. Jesus understood, I am in charge of it all. I am living large. Everything is under my authority. It all belongs to me. I have it all. It's all mine. He knew this, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. Now, if you knew that all things were put under your power and that you come from God, you were turning to God, you may do a lot of things with that knowledge and with that authority. But what does Jesus do with that knowledge and that authority and with that power? Next verse says, so, because of the fact he knew these things, he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Jesus understands all power, all authority is mine. I'm going to take all of that, and I am going to leverage it for the sake of these people that I love. See, Jesus is the one who turned the stakes of power upside down. We are taught that if we have anything, if we own anything, if we have any influence, if we have any power, use it for me. But Jesus takes that idea and he turns it upside down. And he says, if I have any power, if I have any influence, if I have any time, if I have any ability, I'm going to leverage that for you. This is what he's doing in the upper room. He's taking what's available to him and using it for those who had less. And this is what love is supposed to look like. That those who have the power use the power and they leverage it for those who are powerless. That those who have the money take their money and they use it for those, they leverage it for those who are poor. That those who have influence will take their influence and they will leverage it for those who are on the margins. This is what love looks like in the kingdom of God. Another example found in 2 Corinthians, we just read this in our Bible readings this week, chapter 8, verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, and think about that, Jesus was rich. Before he came to earth, what did he not have? He had a great, great place to live, heaven. I mean, he had all holiness, all righteousness, all authority. Everyone's bowing down to him. I mean, he was the definition of rich. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor. In other words, he emptied himself of all of his riches. Why? So that you, through his poverty, might become rich. So Jesus says, you know what? I've got all of this. I'm going to take it. I'm going to leverage it, give it away so that you can be rich. That's what love looks like. One more picture. Philippians chapter 2. This is a famous one. Philippians chapter 2. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. Well, I get a strike right there. What? My attitude has to be the same as Jesus's? I mean, that's pretty hard right there. But okay, what's Jesus' attitude? Verse 6. Who being in very nature God, what that means is that he was in every manner God. I mean, he was God. That was his being. He had all of the God attributes, the power, the omniscience, all of that. He was God, but he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. When I have something that I get used to my advantage, I grasp onto it, I hold on to it, I cling to it, I protect it, maybe I hoard it, I hold on to it. But Jesus, who is God, says, you know what, I don't need to hold on to that. I can let go of that. I can let go of my godness. So that's what he does. He lets go of his godness, made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Now, we may think, oh, it's not so bad. You're made a human. But when you're God, apparently that's a big step down. That's what Jesus did. From God to human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. You getting this? This is kind of the picture of what love looks like according to Jesus. Love one another as I have loved you. Let me tell you how I've loved you. I emptied myself. I gave up my godness. I took whatever I had available to me. I leveraged it for your sake, even to the point of leaving heaven, becoming a human, becoming a servant, and dying an excruciating death on a cross. That's what love looks like. And this is what submission looks like. Whatever you need, if I have it, if I can help, if I could serve, I will. And it's with this aspect of Christ's love in mind that Paul writes to the church in Ephesians, in Ephesus, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. We are to submit to one another. This is a principle that's called mutual submission. I submit to you, you submit to me, we submit to one another. I mean, this is a command for Christ's followers, that we are to live in submission to one another. And then the idea of wives submitting to their husbands is one application of this greater principle. And husbands are to submit to their wives, which is why we're told to love our wives the way Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. That is an application of submission. Children are supposed to obey their parents in everything. Another application of the principle of submission. A family is supposed to be living in mutual submission to one another. And the question is, why would we do this? What good reason is there for me to make everything I have available to the people in my family? We have to get this right, because I know what you're thinking right now. I would love to submit to my wife. But have you met my wife? You know, if I could have 5 minutes with Paul, I could tell him my story about how disrespectful my wife is to me, and he would understand my story, and then he would put a clause in the Bible, maybe some parentheses around it, kind of giving me an out. Or wives are thinking, you know what, submit to my husband, he would take advantage of me, he would do this, he would walk on me like a doormat, blah, blah, blah. There's reasons that I don't submit to my husband, okay? Why do we submit to one another in the context of a family? We have to get this right, or we'll never get traction on this very, very powerful teaching. And so why do we submit to one another? Right here. Out of reverence for Christ. That I don't submit to you because you deserve it, or because you earned it, because you warrant it, because you're worth it. No. I submit to you for Christ's sake. Out of reverence for Christ. Because we all know what would happen if we submitted to one another when the other deserved it. We would never submit to one another, right? And because who deserves that kind of love? It would never happen. But we do it for Christ's sake, that I will leverage all of my assets, all of my time, all of my abilities, all of my power for your benefit, because that is what he did for me when I didn't deserve it. That while I was a sinner, while I was rebelling against him, he put me first. That he leveraged all he had for my sake. And so out of reverence for what Christ has done for us, we too should be submitting to one another. And this is such a powerful relational dynamic. I don't think there's anything more powerful on the planet between people than when we get this right. Which is why Jesus said, first and foremost, the world will know you are my disciples when you love one another the way I have loved you, by submitting to one another. When we get this right, amazing things happen. And this is a beautiful thing in the context of family. This is what family is to look like. This is the ideal. The wives be submitting to husbands, and husbands loving wives the way Christ loved the church, and parents loving and supporting their children, and children listening to and obeying their parents. Mutual submission. It's the ideal. We're in tension. We're here in our reality. But what might this look like in the context of a family? Well, at the risk of oversimplifying this beautiful, beautiful dynamic, this principle from the life and teaching of Jesus, I'd like to just give one question that might kind of embody this idea of mutual submission in your family that I think could radically change things in your home. That if husbands were asking wives this question, and wives asking husbands, and parents asking children, and children asking parents, that this could be a game changer. What is this question? Well, it's just this. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? What can I do to help? This is a question that could change the dynamics of your family and move a family into mutual submission. Can we just practice this together? Can we say this together? What can I do to help? It seems like maybe it's difficult for a few of you. I don't know. Let's try. Maybe we should practice again. You just read the words. Ready? What can I do to help? Very good. This question is an offer to take what is mine and make it available to you. I have some time available. What can I do to help? I see you're working on something that I have some ability in. What can I do to help? I have some power. I have some influence. I'm dad, I'm husband, right? What can I do to help? How can I use the things that I have for your sake out of reverence for Christ? What can I do to help? All right, kids, I need your attention. No talking, kids. I need your attention now, all right? Listen up. Lean in. Because this applies to you. If you are old enough to understand the words coming out of my mouth, this question is for you. And you're like, what question? Okay, the last 5 minutes we've been talking about this question. What can I do to help? That if in the context of your family, you would begin to ask your brothers and your sisters, your parents, this question, what can I do to help? You may say, well, I don't have anything I can do. I'm just a kid, blah, blah, blah. No, you have time, you have abilities, you have talents, you have power, you have influence. That if you would begin to ask this question in the context of your family, you would find some amazing things happening. First of all, if you ask one of your siblings this, they'd probably have a heart attack. Your parents, you ask them, they're going to go into shock. Right? So I want to ask you kids to try this weekend. And everyone in your family, at some point, at the right time, ask this question, what can I do to help? Maybe your parents are having some folks over for lunch or for dinner at some point. They're going to have company. Just pick the right time strategically and walk in and in front of everybody say, Mom, Dad, what can I do to help? And watch the shock in your parents' eyes and the guests' eyes. They will look at you as the model child, and they will call your parents blessed, right? But I'm telling you, if you would start to do this, you're going to find things changing in your life. I bet your parents will lighten your workload, and you'll get a higher allowance. Okay. I'm not making any promises. But here's what will happen. You will find yourself getting more and more influence in the context of your family. You feel like you have no voice right now. You feel like nobody's listening to you. You feel powerless. You start asking this question, and people will start listening to you. People will start taking you seriously. People will start respecting you. What can I do to help? This will go a long way. Parents, this applies to you too, with your kids. Do you have any idea how much of our communication with our kids is all about correcting, guiding, rebuking, reminding, nagging, right? I mean, like 90-some% probably, I'm just guessing, it's not scientific, that almost everything that comes out of my mouth toward my kids is usually, did you do this? Hey, don't forget this. Hey, and why did that happen? And don't just stop. Just everything that comes out of our mouths nearly is a correction or a rebuke or a reminder or a nag. It is a small percentage of our words that let our kids know how we are there for them and how they don't have to do life alone and how we're on the same team. And so we need to ask our kids regularly this question. Hey, what can I do to help? You had a rough day at school. What can I do to help? You didn't get that score on the test that you were hoping to do, or you missed an assignment. Not, why did you do that? And no. What can I do to help? You had an argument with your brother. What can I do to help? Or hey, I just thought I'd stop by your room, see how you're doing, and just ask, is there anything I could do to help? This lets your kids know that you're not just their disciplinarian, you're not just the rule enforcer, you're not just the joy killer, right? This lets them know that you're on their side, that they don't have to do life alone. What can I do to help? Wives, this is an important question to ask your husbands. This kind of brings you up alongside of your husband and says, you know what, I am on the same team with you. I understand the load that you carry, and I want to carry some of it with you. What can I do to help? It says to your husband that whatever you have, you are putting it at their disposal, leveraging what you have for their sake, that you will use what is yours to serve them, and it will do amazing things in your husband's heart. Let me just say that I have a wife that is awesome at this. You know, she doesn't use these exact words all of the time, but she is consistently coming to me, letting me know that she is available to serve me in any of the needs I may have throughout the day. I'm going to the store. Can I pick something up? Hey, I got some free time today. Is there something I could do to serve you? Anything I could do to help make your life easier today? Just constantly the questions are coming. And most of the time, the answer is, no, I'm good. Thanks so much for asking. But even when there's nothing for her to do for me, something happens in my heart when that question comes. It is so endearing. It builds such intimacy and such relationship because I know that we're a partnership and that she is available to me and that she is making what is available or what is hers available to me and leveraging it for my sake. I mean, I know that I'm not in this alone. I'm not carrying the weight on my own. And just the reality of how good she is at this came to me recently. A while ago, it was a couple years ago, she gave me a gift. I think it was a stocking stuffer on Christmas or something. It was this coupon book. Have you seen these like relational coupon books? Maybe you've seen these before. It's like a book, and you tear out a coupon, you get things like alone time, breakfast in bed, guys' night out, foot massage, that kind of thing. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. I could use some of these things. And so I put it somewhere where I'd remember it. And I never found myself using this thing. Like a year, 2 years passed. I'm like, man, these have an expiration date or anything? I'm just like looking at them. And then I would do some of this stuff, and like a week later I'd look at it and I'm like, oh, I had a night out with the guys, or I had some alone time. I didn't cash in a coupon. I should have cashed in a coupon. I missed an opportunity. And it finally dawned on me, the reason I was never using the coupon book is because I didn't have to use the coupon book. That I don't have the kind of wife who says, you know what, oh, you want to do that, redeem a coupon. No. It's going to cost you something. That we have the kind of relationship that if I want to do something, she's happy to provide that to me. Now, of course, I don't take advantage of that, but if I want alone time, she says, hey, you need that, take alone time. If I want to go out with somebody, she says, hey, go have fun. It's not the kind of relationship that is transactional. And so I was going to throw this thing out. I'm like, I don't need this. I'm going to throw it out. But then I decided, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep it somewhere where I see it all the time to remind me what an amazing wife I have. I don't need coupons. That we have a kind of relationship where we submit mutually. Now, some of you, I know your relationship probably isn't there. Some guys are probably saying, can I get my hands on that coupon book? Maybe I could use that. But you're not going to need it because your wives are going to start asking the question, what can I do to help? Powerful question. All right, men, saved you for last. This is a question we have got to start asking our wives. What can I do to help? Because I know you, and chances are your wives are afraid to ask you for anything. Because what happens is we go to work and we work hard and we give everything we have at the office. And when we come home, we're tired, maybe we're grumpy, we have a certain sense of entitlement that, you know what, now is my time. And I'm just going to sit and I'm going to veg, I'm going to do my own thing. And then maybe our wives come to us and ask us for some help. Hey, can you do this? Can you help me with this? And then, the sighing and the heavy breathing and the eye rolling and the huffing and the excuse making all come out. Do you know how hard I work and I just need some time alone? Now. And our wives are like, whew, okay. And pretty soon, they stop asking. And they start just piling stuff on their back. Oh, I'll do this, and I have to do this, and I can't get any help with this. And they continue to just pile it on, until they get to the point where they break. And we wonder, what happened to her? Where did that come from? Asking this question could go so far in beginning to restore trust that you are there to be a member of the team. What can I do to help? Let's our wives know that we're with them. Now, I know that there are barriers to this. Things that you're probably already thinking, yeah, but have you thought of this? And one of the biggest barriers to this is fear, right? Guys, I know that you're not afraid of much, but this is one you're probably like, what? Terrified? Because we're afraid that we might actually get asked to do something. And we don't want to do more stuff. Right? We got our own stuff. Let me focus on my stuff. You focus on your stuff. We don't have to work together. Let me just kind of focus on me and my world. Let me remain the center of my universe. If you impinge on that, it might cost me something. It might be expensive. You might ask me to do something that takes time. But remember, why do we do this? Out of reverence for Christ. Jesus spent everything he had on us. When our world was in need of saving, Jesus went to the Father and he said, "What can I do to help?" And the Father said, "Son, it's going to be painful. It's going to be expensive. It's going to cost everything you have." And Jesus said, "I'm willing. I'll do that." And it's out of reverence for the one who spent everything on me, although it cost him everything, that I make myself available to you, that I will serve you, that I will submit to you, that I will become an actual follower of Christ by doing the things that Jesus did. We get to be like Jesus. We have an opportunity every time we interact with someone in our family. And the good news is, most of the time, someone asks you to do something, it won't end in a flogging or crucifixion. Okay? So we can celebrate that. It won't be that costly. May have to clean the garage, maybe have to put together some furniture, I don't know, but it won't ultimately end in our death. And here's the thing. We're also afraid of this. We are afraid that if I make myself available to you, to lay myself down, to take everything I have and leverage it for your sake, that somehow, some way, this is going to diminish my happiness. And if we're honest with ourselves, that's one of our major fears, that if I stop living all for me and I start living for you, I'm not going to be as happy. That I'm going to be unfulfilled. But the irony here is that when we give ourselves away to the people in our family, we find the fulfillment we thought would come through selfishness. But it's never come. You know, we think that hanging on to our selfish interest is the way for us to be happy, but intuitively we know that's not true because it hasn't worked so far. We think that we'll be happy when people just leave us alone and everyone does what we ask them to do and we're put in charge and everyone's kind of orbiting around me, doing my interests and doing my every command. We think once I get everyone just kind of orbiting me, I'll be happy. But we all know that's not true because for many of us, that's where you are right now. That the entire family is kind of walking on eggshells, orbiting you, doing everything you ask them to do, living according to your agenda, and you're still not happy. Happiness does not come through selfishness or through controlling others. Happiness doesn't come through me being the center of everything. Family happiness comes through mutual submission. And that's when we feel most alive, when we're giving ourselves away for the people in our lives that we love. This is the key to being happy and content in your family. Not getting more, but giving more of yourself away. And when you do this, it brings us this kind of internal sense, wow, I am doing what I was created to do. Serving the people I love. And then when you do that, in most cases, guess what? Other people in your family start to submit as well and serve the needs of others. And pretty soon, people in your family are actually pretty happy. Another barrier we have, I'll just mention this briefly, is we wonder, well, what about that whole thing the Bible says about leadership, and if everyone's submitting to one another, who's in charge? And doesn't the Bible say that the man is the head of the household and all these different things? Yes, and the Bible does say those things. And the man can still be the head of the household, doesn't have anything to do with leadership. Jesus was the leader. Jesus had all authority, but what did he do with his authority? He used it for the sake of others. It's what we're commanded to do. It's called servant leadership, mutual submission. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. What can I do to help? Now, if you are a follower of Jesus, guess what? This isn't an option for us. We're commanded on this one to submit to one another. Now, if you're not a Christ follower, you're off the hook on this. And this may actually be a reason you never become a Christian. Like, I don't want to submit to everybody around me. That's going to make me miserable. I'll challenge you on that. I don't think it will. And actually, you could try this one out for free. If you're not a follower of Christ, you don't have to be a Jesus follower in order to kind of just start asking this question in the context of your family. What can I do to help? Try it for a week and just see what happens in the context of your family. You don't have to add Jesus to it or anything. Just try it out. You'll see it works. But if you're a follower of Jesus, again, we have no choice on this whatsoever. Jesus did this for us, and we're told to love one another as he has loved us. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to ask the question, what can I do to help? Just imagine what this might look like in the context of your family if everyone were asking this question. So as you leave here today, we're going to give you, even the youngsters, if you could read, you get one, a little business card. It just has the question, what can I do to help? And I'd encourage you to keep this somewhere this week where you're going to be able to see it a lot, like maybe in your hand. Just keep it there all week. Some of you may need to read this. What can I do to help? Maybe it's going to be hard. I don't know. But put it somewhere where you're going to see it. And let me just challenge you for the next week to ask this question consistently of everyone in your family. And it may seem odd. I mean, we're only doing this because the pastor said to do it. But just watch and see what happens in your heart. Watch and see what happens in the dynamics of your family over the course of the next week. It's not going to change everything. It's not going to fix everything, but it will point your family in the direction it needs to be going if you ever intend to have a Christian, functional family. What can I do to help?